Hi there. I'm fascinated by Gnosticism and the unforgetting principle, which could also be a process as well. Um, I have in mind that there's three categories of unforgetting. Um, there's the idea basically that you should never forget something that you've learnt. Once you have the truth of the gnosis, then you want to be able to hang on to that truth or not forget it. But that's not really quite what I'm looking for either. And then there's the other thing, this talking about this as my partner and how we met. We met at a Men of the Trees meeting many, many years ago. And we just knew each other. It's like we knew each other from somewhere, though we'd never met. And it's like as if you could remember, it's like you know basically that you've met someone before, and you've been friends before, and you've had a relationship before. So you might meet someone on the road, a stranger, and yet you sort of have an idea that you've met before, and and so you might meet the Christ on the road, and you will have met Christ before in heaven, and you just have this knowledge that you've met before, that you've have had a relationship with this person, or had a relationship with this person, and and that's really really interesting to my mind because. It is like people say, "What is gnosis?" It's like a knowing. Well, what do you mean? And I suppose it's like that must because you have no reason to know somebody. You know them, but you have no reason because you apparently you've never met them before. That's the empirical data, right? That you never met this person before. You're quite sure of that, and you could carry out an empirical investigation, and that would show you that you'd never met this person before. And yet, you know them, like you've met before hundreds of times, or thousands of times even. And you've had a relationship with them. Good, bad, beautiful, ugly, whatever, it doesn't matter. You've had a relationship with this person. And I suppose that's sort of what is meant by gnosis. So it's like as if you have God, and that you've always known God. You knew God for trillions and trillions of years, well, going back into infinity. And yet, so when you meet some avatar of God or God himself in some form on this earth, it's like as if, or basically even the gnosis, or even the word, the logos, the logoi of God. You come across that in the New Testament or in the Gnostic Gospels or something, and it's like as if something clicks in your mind. Oh yes, I remember you. I remember the truth of this statement. It's like some people back in last century, people were attracted to paganism, neo-paganism, and a lot of people said that they'd been to church and had contact with Orthodox Christian ideas, and they'd been bored by them and unsatisfied by them, and unattracted to them because of several aspects of the theology they didn't like. And then they discovered neo-paganism, and they said some people said something clicked in me. It's like a I've seen this before. I've worshipped the gods before. I've worshipped Sana and Imbolc and Beelzebub and Lunacy before, and it's like I'm coming home to a religion that I feel safe with, that I connect to in some shape or form. And of course, people have that connection with Christianity. Born again Christians say, I've come home. I suddenly, I was lost, but now I'm found, kind of idea. So I suppose that is kind of like, you meet somebody and you just know that they can be trusted or loved or whatever. So you meet God again on this plane in some form or another. Millions of different forms you can meet God in. And you just know it's God, and you just know that you had a connection with God, and you can have a connection with God again. That you were lost, but now you're found, and now you found yourself as well. So that has a feeling. And then I had this kind of thing that thought experiment where you can imagine this is the ineffable. This is like heaven, to put it in sort of colloquial terms. And then you, for whatever reason, you came out of heaven and you found yourself in this world, the world of the demiurge. And I was thinking that you're surrounded by all the words that begin with dis. If you think about all the words that begin with dis, they have a negative connotation, or at least I think most of them have, like disarray, disassociation. There's loads of words beginning with dis, and I can't think of any of them now. Dissatisfied, disquieted. There's loads of obscure words which are no longer used, and quite common words which are used still. And they all begin with this word dis. And of course, dis, I think, was the ancient Roman idea of death as well. It was a place of death, a miserable place of death, I might add. A sort of horrible pit that you fell into when you died. And you fell into this pit, and you never got to the bottom. So you're always falling into this abyss. A really horrible kind of fear of death would produce. You'd have a fear of death if you thought about death in those terms. So you find yourself in this world of dis. And basically, you could be driven mad by it all. You have to be a rather depressant, I suppose, person prone to depression. But then even some people who are jolly and happy sometimes have a moment of depression in which they realise that all the happiness that they have and all the pleasure that they experience is all temporary. It's all going to go. You can't take it with you. You can't take your millions with you. Do you know what I mean? And so that's kind of, and then, so you could be driven mad, but then Christ comes along and he has his Last Supper, and it's, and you drink the wine in remembrance of Christ, but it's not like somebody says, it's not like drinking a toast to Jesus, every Sunday. You're toasting Jesus's health because he's immortal. He doesn't have any health because he doesn't die, does he? He doesn't have any disease because he's immortal. So why on earth would you toast the health of Jesus? And you eat of the bread, which the ancient Romans said was symbolic of cannibalism, and they were appalled by that kind of concept and accused the Christians of actual cannibalism. In fact, it wasn't a piece of bread that they ate; it was a young boy or something. It was terrible, according to Livy. Anyway, was it Livy? Yeah, I think so. There's like appalling thing, like a terrible cult, a degenerate cult. Christianity was branded, but even by a lot of intellectuals as a degenerate cult of cannibalism. But the idea, I think, is that from the ancient Greek word meaning unforgetting, the idea is that you live in this world of distraction and dismay and despair and all the rest of it. And you could forget everything. You could forget yourself. You could forget love. You could forget God. You could forget a higher purpose in life. Like when you bang your funny bone, they call it the funny bone, which is your elbow. It's like really, really painful, and all you can think about is the pain. It's so intense. I don't know why they call it the funny bone, because it makes you sometimes cry with the pain, and you forget who you are in this moment of pain. You forget what you are. It's so intense, and you cry out against the universe. Say, why me? Why did I have to hit my funny bone? Why does nobody else does, but I always do. And you go into all this kind of CBT kind of stuff. I'm always hitting my funny bone, and I have a terrible life, and I'm poor me, and I'm miserable. And you go into all this puddle of pity, as somebody called it as well online. And that's just from banging your funny bone. Never mind childbirth or loss of a dear one or something like that. So you have this, the idea is that you need to unforget. It's like all these things could make you forget, and you've got to have a way of coming back to the center. You've got to have a way of remembering again the spiritual life, which in your moment of pain and anguish and anger and jealousy or whatever you've forgotten. So it's like the Last Supper. It represents a process, really, a process of taking yourself back to the Garden of Eden in your imagination or in your heart. It's rekindling the heart spark, soul part of yourself that has been blotted out. It's like the sun is like the soul is the sun, and the clouds are the pain, and the sun has been blotted out apparently, but it's still there. You just have to be just not reminded, but it's almost like you have to have some process which stops you from even forgetting. So even in the midst of pain and anguish and anger and loss and scarcity and all that, you never forget, because it's one thing to be reminded of something, but if you're cursing God because you've hit your funny bone, even if you're reminded of God later, the process should be to never forget God even when you're in the midst of pain. You also see, so it's an unforgetting. You never forget God, whatever's going on. Do you know what I mean? And whatever God sends is welcome. Says the knights of Boars. And so whatever is going on, you never forget. So it's an unforgetting process. So you'd have to train your mind to never forget the truth, the logoi of Christ, no matter what's going on. If your house is being robbed, you sit down and you just think, well, Christ, well, people do say Christ, don't they, when some things go wrong? It's like saying Ra or Ram. Hindus say Ram. And I think it's not a curse so much. It's just maybe, but I mean that's kind of superficial. You need to have a mind. You need to train your mind to go to the center, to go to the still center, to hear the voice of the silence, even in the midst of terrible things that are happening to you and to your loved ones. Which is even worse, isn't it? When horrible things are happening to somebody you love, that's when you really forget everything. And go into anger and rage and despair and curse God, curse the ineffable God. Now, I mean, and nobody actually does curse the demiurge. I notice they only ever curse the good God, which is another contemplation in itself, isn't it? Really. So I have in mind that Jesus meant that, just as you break bread and you drink the wine and the Last Supper, you have to do this as a mental process, a contemplation, which basically it's like a sort of kind of a hum sound. It's always there, no matter what happens to you. The Last Supper is still happening inside your mind all the time. You know what I mean? So that's my idea. That's a dynamic process. But also the other thing about gnosis is when you know something that you didn't know you knew. Because obviously you'd forgotten that you knew it. And then the final thing is, I've forgotten what it was. What was the first thing I said? I've forgotten. There you are. You see, it wasn't very important actually. So there you are. You see, you forget things that are not important, and you remember things that are important, and you also remember things that were traumatic. You talk about an unforgettable experience. Usually, it's some kind of childhood trauma that still haunts you, and that's an unforgettable. You'd like to forget that experience, all right, and yet you forget the pleasurable, beautiful experiences. I suppose. Well, maybe depressives like me only remember the bad things and never remember the good things. But then I suppose really I should have to remember the time when my soul was united with God in heaven. And I've got to find a way of stimulating that part of my mind, or imagining that part of the mind. I don't know whether my soul is capable of doing it, but there's some part of my nous or nous that must be stimulated to remember the joy of heaven. Even if I can't remember the joys on this earth, which don't amount to much really, but it's better to remember the joys of heaven rather than the pain of past trauma, which is unforgettable in quotation marks. I mean, obviously, if I took enough, drugs or something, if you're a heroin addict, you can take enough heroin to block out all the pain and the memory of pain. But then the heroin kills you, you see. So that's not much of an answer, really. So somehow, through contemplation of the Last Supper, you have to remember the things that are true, which is heaven and Christ and the Logoi, and forget the things that are false, which are the things of the demiurge, which is either pain or pleasure. So if this video makes any sense to you whatsoever, then, well, I hope it does. I'm not sure it makes much sense to me at the moment.